You know, all of us have so enjoyed being here on the Pacific Northwest coast, Oregon coast, where there is so much beauty and so much richness of resources, and it's just been a great gift to be able to live here and enjoy it, eh? And it came at a price. I want to share a little bit some of what was here, not just here on the coast, but throughout the continent prior to Columbus, Christopher Columbus, who was celebrated throughout Spain on Friday. We're going to go way back. There were no people in the Americas until the last ice age. The earliest dates I've been able to find anything for is 40,000 BC. It may be plus or minus. Most people say 26,000 to 15,000 are the first time we see human beings, the species, Homo sapiens, anywhere near the North American and South American continents, which is kind of interesting. Because by then they pretty well populated all of Africa and Asia and into Southeast Asia and Australia. And they were just beginning to go up into that Arctic region. And it wasn't just from the Mongolian area, it was also from the Scandinavian area. There have been people from both sides of the continent populating this continent since the beginning, which is something not everybody knows. By the year 1490, some estimates say 112. I've heard as high as 220 million people. Now, when I was a kid, that's how many people were here on this continent. It was about 220 million people. Most of us were Europeans at that point. By the end of the 1600s, that number was clearly and countable at around 6 million. And that was largely disease, largely new forms of microbes attacking, but it was also people saying, you're not us, if you're not us, you're not okay. So it was a really rough couple of hundred years. In 1490, those people were located, and the darker the color, the more dense the population. The darkest green is 100 people per square kilometer. And that's a lot of people. And that isn't just in what we consider, what many people have been taught Native American culture looks like. These are some of the language groups, it isn't all of them, that were present. Each one of those languages is not entirely understandable to someone speaking another one of those languages. The colors are the groups. So that orange color is Uto-Aztecan, and it extends basically from Aztec territory down in Mexico City, all up into southern Oregon. And the yellow one is the Sioux languages. And the green is it's called Algic. It's the Woodlands tribes. Notice that the Cheyenne Arapaho also speak that same kind of language group. And then in the middle of the gold that is down there, there's this little thing, it says Zuni in the middle, but that's really Navajo. Navajo were the last ones to come. So what does it mean to be indigenous? We say that all those people were indigenous. We're all native born, but that doesn't make us indigenous. This other 2 points is what makes us indigenous. We are culturally interconnected into the elements and processes of the local environment. One of the things about empire culture, which is what most Caucasians have lived in for the last 6,000 years, is we don't engage with the environment. We say we're here to control nature. We don't allow and become part of the natural processes. And the second one is identifying oneself as inseparable from that environment. An indigenous person to an indigenous person, all the land is sacred, and I am not separate from it. My cells and the cells of the plants are one set of cells, right? The critters in our region are the same people as me. They are all people with me. And one of the things about those languages is that they tend to separate the two-leggeds, human beings, as I am people, you are not. My tribe is people. Dene in Navajo means, it means people. We are the people. Hopi means the people. Tewa means the people. All these language names mean we are the people and everyone else isn't. But the people includes the four-leggeds and the standing and the swimming and the crawling. So the indigenous way of thinking is different from the empire way of thinking. We think it's resources to exploit. It's stuff to use. A friend of mine had this beautiful land in southern Oregon. She sold it to some Californians, and they came and they cut down all the trees. Okay, why did you move to Oregon? Right? But no indigenous person would even think of such a thing, right? These trees have been coppiced. If you allow a tree to grow up in a straight trunk, if you need the wood, you cut off that tree, you've got no tree. If you cut it early enough so that it comes in separate small trunks, then you cut off one of those small trunks when you need the wood, and you still have the tree. So coppicing is a practice that was going on in Europe, but it was also going on here. So I have some friends that are trying to restore the oak savanna, but they don't know about coppicing. So they're not going to be able to restore it to what it had been before. Does that make sense? Yeah. And coppicing is fabulous because that's great firewood. It gives you access to all the resources of that species of tree without ever destroying the tree. Okay? And that mindset, that realization that we can work with the natural processes and have the resources that we need without destroying the resource, without destroying the source of it, is a huge part of it. The folks that lived here built their homes to fit the environments they were living in, unlike us. We expect the environment to just be whatever it is, and we build the same kind of home everywhere. We have understood in the world that I have been working in since the 70s that it is possible to build a house so that it uses almost no fuel or electricity to be warm, kept warm and cool. And nobody is building them because they aren't part of the Uniform Building Code. 40 years later, 45 years later, we still don't have them in the Uniform Building Code. What's going on here? These guys were building to fit the climate, right? So up in the top corner is a restored version of what had been built in the woodlands. People during the wet inclement months several families would move into that longhouse and share it and keep warm and share the resources. In the top left corner is another longhouse. That's here from up north of here. That actually is in British Columbia. In the plains, the wigwams, and then during the winters they built earth lodges. If you remember those great pioneer sod houses, well, that was what the natives had been living in during the winters for thousands of years. They didn't invent sod houses. The pioneers didn't invent them. And so summertime is teepee, and wintertime is the sod house. Down in the corner on that side is the basically grass house of the southeast, down in Florida, Georgia, not unlike what was going on in Central America or in Kona, Hawaii at that time. And then over on this side, this is Taos Pueblo, the longest occupied community on the continent at this point. It was built probably about 5,000, begun about 5,000 BC. It's been here a long time. It's been built and rebuilt. And it's almost identical in structure. I was blown away when I was starting to study the archaeology of the Middle East, especially what we call Asia Minor. Those buildings look like Taos Pueblo. I was like, really? Wow. And it has to do with the climate and the location and the available resources and. But it is a very efficient way to live given that environment. And that's one of the things that defines indigenous as compared to what I'm calling empire colonialists. There were also multiple cities on the continent at the time. Chaco had recently been abandoned when Columbus arrived, but there were about 10,000 people living in Chaco. Right? And then Cahokia, which is on the Mississippi. This is Mississippian culture, and those of you who know Central American architecture will recognize that architecture. And again, Hawaiian architecture, the traditional, is very much like this. 20,000 people living on the Mississippi, southern Illinois, northern Missouri. Teotihuacan, most of us know that. Again, several dozens of thousands of people. And then, we think of the pyramids in Egypt. They got nothing on Central America. Those are all locations of pyramids in Central America and southern Mexico. Lots and lots of pyramids. Lots and lots of time to build incredibly amazing structures. We think of the Native Americans that were here when the Europeans arrived as primitive. Hardly. There's a new photographic technique that allows people to see through the forest canopy, and so this is a conglomeration of several archaeologists' photographs of a region on the border between Colombia and Mexico. This is all one city that was present prior to Columbus. These little guys were named by a Frenchman, Jacques Moule. And there's several dozen of them. We don't know what they are, but they're kind of cool. Oh, you need something? This is what introduced me to the complexity of pre-Columbian art. I was an anthropology major and worked in a museum when I was an undergrad. And I actually had a pin that was identical with that frog down in the corner there. But check out that dragon up there. Ain't he cool? Shell work, ceramics. I mean, there is nothing in Europe from that time period that was any better than that, I have to say. I love this piece. That's a trumpet. And this is copper work from the Mississippi Valley. Isn't that fabulous? Just blows me away. A little ceramic from the Mississippi Valley. And those are teacups. We're calling them teacups. We don't know exactly what they are, but I think they have spouts. I think they're actually pitchers. But they're almost as thin as porcelain. This is all from the Mississippi Valley. And I don't need to explain that. The one thing I will say is the blanket and the hat are made from cedar bark. And the hat, always fascinated me as an undergrad and so on. How is it that that hat design made it over from Japan and China and Southeast Asia? Well, it turns out it did. There is more and more evidence that East Asians were coming over following the currents. If you saw that huge block of concrete that landed at Newport on the beach, it just floated over from Japan on the current. Nobody had to navigate that to get it there. And so we think that there was quite a bit of that during that period. The currents had changed. They're changing now, again. We don't know what it's going to be like. But people could kind of drift over into Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. That green group, that's the Navajos. They're Athabascans coming in from Asia. And then the arrow going up is the Mayans moving up along the coast and into the Mississippi Valley. Most of the Mississippian culture and the Mayan culture overlap an awful lot. And then, you know, in that, we get the Scandinavians. They were here long before Columbus was. And then the Columbus and the slavers and the Spanish and all of that. Yeah. So as I've understood the history of humanity, for about 6,000 years, people have been pouring out of the Caucasus, and about every 200 years, they take over another region and do this. And I call that empire culture. It's a culture that says the world is ours and we get to do this no matter what. I didn't get up and do a joy and concern, but I have a very great joy. A book that got started years and years ago got finished, and it is published as of this week, and it's called Creating a New World. And one of the points that I make in there is that we have assumed we've been operating on something I'm calling a myth called cowboy economics. And cowboy economics has been here since those first cowboys drove their herds out of the Caucasus and overran the gardens in Mesopotamia, and then overran the gardens in India, and then overran the gardens in Europe, and then overran the gardens here. All right? Same people. And this is what we have done over and over and over again. What I think is happening, though, is I think that this generation and the generations following, the baby boomers, are beginning to recognize the utility and the validity of an indigenous mindset. And that these videos are happening to help us see that. And part of what's going on, and that Helen named, is the cultural, the political culture is putting it in our face how that old way of doing things is not working for us. Sous Chef in Denver is one of the first places, and I was told a week or so ago that the Native American Museum, that's now part of the Smithsonian, offers a different meal from different tribal groups on a regular basis. Yes?
I ate one.
Good. And one of the things that I've appreciated, you saw those language groups. When I go to Canada, the sign is in English, French, and the local native language.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And the cultural centers there also offer local indigenous foods as much as possible. So do get into those places when you go visiting in Northland. So what's happened? You know, we've homogenized what was an incredibly diverse, incredibly populated set of communities, into something we've called America. You know, and the salad bowl that was America is now becoming a bisque, right? A soup that everything looks the same and tastes the same, and the language has to be the same. What I think is beginning to happen more and more is that these groupings are splitting back up again because the political and economic system must conform in part to the ecology. You can't separate them. We have, in fact, in North America, what a guy named Joel Garreau calls 9 nations. He says what goes on and how politics is done in Mex-America is very different, and that would be from Salt Lake down, okay, from how it happens in the Northwest, in Ecotopia, or how it happens in the Foundry, that part of it, or how it happens in Dixie. The leadership is going to show up in different ways. The structures are going to be different. The values are different. When we look at what our values are living in this incredible place that we live in, there are a lot of New Yorkers who can't understand us a bit, right? I get New Yorkers when I'm in Portland, they'll come into a restaurant and go, "What's with the service here?" And we're all going, "Oh my goodness, it just feels so good." And then we go back east and we're going, "Can they slow down, please? How come they're always so angry?" We do have cultural diversity, but it is nothing like what was here before. And part of that is built into the Caucasian empire culture mindset. Now, those of you who don't know my theories on this, I've studied the beginning of every single empire in the world, and every one of them was either a blonde or a redhead. Every single empire in the world. And in every one of them, the dark-skinned people are considered the bottom of the heap. In every single empire in the world. So I call it one culture. It's all one empire culture. And what we have been seeing on TV for the last several months has been empire culture in our face. And it has not felt good. All right? So what we get to begin to do is realize we have choices. And I strongly encourage getting in touch with what was here prior to empire. Wherever we are, make it our own. You know, the place that I'm living in, I can go anywhere in my yard and gather food. And that's one of the things that he talks about. I'm not going to take the time, but he says, you know, everything's edible out there if you know how. If you've been told it's poisonous, it's probably powerful medicine. I think that's worth paying attention to, right? So we can start knowing that this is an incredibly wonderful, supportive place. The earth will take care of us as we take care of her. Yeah? And it's so easy to fall into the old habits. It's so easy to get in the car and drive the 5-6 blocks or the half a mile or the whatever. It's so easy to just pick up that package of white rice. It's so easy. But it isn't serving us. And what we are seeing on the media is the results of, the impacts of, the consequences of falling into that easy pattern that we have been brainwashed, frankly, into accepting as normal.